Sad millionaire CEO dines alone on Christmas Eve. Then a single mother and her twin daughters arrive. He was already seated when the waiter returned and quietly said the kitchen was running late. Everett Callahan nodded, polite as always, staring at the empty chair across from him. Christmas Eve, prime rib on the way, a full restaurant, and somehow, he was the only one sitting completely alone. That wasn't the part that hurt the most. He reached into his coat pocket, touching the small velvet box he never opened anymore. It had been there for years, untouched, like a promise, frozen in time. Tonight was supposed to be different, in a life he no longer lived. He had imagined laughter, small voices, two little girls asking for dessert. Instead, there was silence, and the sound of cutlery around him. Across the room, families leaned toward each other, sharing plates and stories. Children swung their legs under tables, impatient and glowing with excitement. Everett kept his eyes down, pretending his phone mattered more than the ache. He told himself this was just another dinner, just another night. But Christmas Eve never lets you lie. If you believe in compassion and the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us how one small act can change everything. He checked his watch, not because he was in a hurry. Waiting felt easier than remembering why he hated nights like this. The chair across from him stayed empty, perfectly aligned, painfully intentional. That chair had been meant for someone who never made it this far, and he'd built an entire empire trying not to think about that. Then the restaurant door opened again, letting in cold air and snow. A woman stepped inside, brushing flakes from her coat, holding two small hands. The girls were identical, same curls, same bright eyes, same red bows. They scanned the room like it was a wonderland. Everett didn't look up yet, but something shifted. The hostess leaned down to speak to the woman, pointing toward a corner table. One of the girls tugged free, her shoes tapping softly on the floor. She stopped walking and stared at Everett, not curious, not shy, just certain, as if she'd found exactly who she was looking for. Everett felt it before he saw her, that pull you get when a moment is about to change you. He raised his eyes slowly, unprepared for the small face watching him closely. The girl tilted her head, studying him, and then she smiled. She took a step closer, completely unafraid. Her sister whispered something behind her, but she didn't stop. Everett opened his mouth, unsure why his heart had started racing. He had no idea what she was about to say, and no idea that his life was about to split in two. Everett Callahan had built his life around things that didn't ask questions. Numbers made sense. Systems behaved. Companies followed rules if you were precise enough. People, on the other hand, were unpredictable. That's why he'd learned to keep a careful distance. It was safer that way, or at least that's what he told himself. At 41, Everett was known as a self-made millionaire CEO. Financial tech, clean reputation, no scandals, no drama. Magazines loved to call him disciplined, focused, unstoppable. What they didn't write about were the empty apartments, or the holidays he spent pretending work was enough. Years ago, there had been someone, a woman who laughed easily and believed he'd eventually slow down. She used to tease him about calendars and deadlines. She'd already picked names for their future kids. 2 girls, she'd said, always 2. Then life stepped in quietly and took her away. No warnings, no villains, just a phone call that split time in half. Everett had learned how to survive that day by shutting something down. Love became a locked room he never reopened. Work became the only place grief couldn't reach him. Since then, he measured life in quarters and profits. He expanded offices, hired teams, signed contracts worth millions of dollars. He bought silence with long hours and control. And when people asked why he never remarried, he smiled politely. Some stories were easier left untold. Christmas Eve was the hardest night of the year. It always reminded him of plans that never made it past imagination. Tonight, he'd chosen the restaurant because it was busy. Crowds made loneliness easier to hide. No one noticed a quiet man when the room was loud. He sat perfectly straight, hands folded, like he belonged anywhere. The waiter recognized him but treated him like everyone else. Everett appreciated that. No special attention, no pity, just another customer waiting for dinner. That was when he noticed the woman more clearly. She wasn't dressed for the place, but she wasn't uncomfortable either. She moved with purpose, gently guiding the 2 identical girls. They were excited, whispering to each other, eyes wide with wonder. Everett felt something tighten in his chest before he understood why. He'd imagined that scene once. Not this woman, not these girls, but the shape of it was painfully familiar. A mother, 2 daughters, a Christmas Eve together, a future he'd never stepped into. He looked away quickly, annoyed at himself. This was just coincidence, just memory playing tricks. He had no place in anyone else's family. That chapter was closed, sealed, finished, or so he believed, right up until the moment one of the girls walked toward him. The girl stopped right beside Everett's table, close enough that he could see the freckles on her nose. She wasn't smiling like a child asking for something. She looked serious, like she'd made an important decision and meant to stand by it. Everett straightened instinctively, unsure why his chest felt tight. He had no idea how to speak to a moment like this. "Sir," she said softly, her voice clear over the hum of the restaurant. "Nobody should be alone on Christmas Eve." Her words landed gently, but they landed deep. Everett blinked, caught off guard by how simple and true they sounded. Around them, the room seemed to hold its breath. Behind her, the woman froze, eyes widening in quiet panic. "I'm so sorry," she rushed in, already stepping forward. "She's just very observant." Her hand reached for the girl's shoulder, ready to pull her back. Everett lifted his palm slightly, signaling it was all right. The second girl peeked out from behind her sister, identical face, different energy. She watched Everett closely, curiosity written all over her expression. The first girl tilted her head, waiting patiently for an answer. There was no fear in her posture, no doubt in her stance, only certainty, as if kindness was the most natural thing in the world. "Would you like 3 good companions for dinner?" the girl added. "Just for tonight." Everett felt something shift under his ribs, something he hadn't touched in years. He thought of the empty chair across from him. He thought of how long it had been since anyone asked him to share space. The woman's cheeks flushed as she tried again to apologize. "We didn't mean to interrupt," she said, her voice tight with embarrassment. "We were just passing by." Everett shook his head slowly, his mind racing to catch up with his heart. "No," he said gently, surprising even himself. He looked at the girl, then at her sister, then back to the woman. "Yes," Everett said again, clearer this time. "I would like that." The first girl smiled, not wide or loud, but satisfied, like something had gone exactly the way it was meant to. The woman hesitated, caught between pride and something softer. The girls looked up at her, hope glowing in their eyes. Everett gestured toward the empty chair, then the space beside it. "There's more than enough food," he said quietly. And just like that, 3 strangers stepped into a story none of them had planned. Lauren Whitmore hesitated for a second longer than she should have. It wasn't because she didn't trust Everett, but because she didn't trust moments like this. Life had taught her that good things rarely arrived without strings attached. She'd learned to protect her daughters first, even from kindness, especially from kindness that felt too generous to be real. The girls, however, needed no convincing. They slid into the chairs with careful excitement, hands folded, eyes bright. They looked around the table like it was something sacred. A Christmas Eve dinner shared with a stranger felt important to them. Lauren watched closely, ready to intervene if anything felt wrong. Everett noticed her tension immediately. He recognized that look, the one that said everything was being measured. He softened his posture, lowering his voice, slowing his movements. He didn't want to overwhelm her or the girls. He just wanted the silence to stop feeling so heavy. "I'm Everett," he said gently, offering nothing more than his name. Lauren nodded, still cautious. "I'm Lauren," she replied, resting a hand lightly on the table. "And these are my daughters." She paused, then smiled faintly. "Ava and Lily." The girls introduced themselves at the same time, then laughed at the collision. Their laughter cut through Everett like warm light. It reminded him of a sound he'd almost forgotten how to recognize. Not polished, not controlled, just alive. He felt something in his chest loosen, just a little. The waiter returned, menus in hand, eyes flicking between the 4 of them. Everett noticed Lauren's shoulders tense again. He spoke quickly, calmly, before discomfort could settle. "They'll join me," he said simply. No explanation, no authority, just an invitation. As the waiter walked away, An awkward quiet settled at the table. Lauren glanced at Everett, searching his face for intention. The girls swung their legs under the table, whispering to each other. Everett stared down at the tablecloth, suddenly unsure of himself. This was unfamiliar territory, and it scared him more than any business risk ever had. Lauren finally broke the silence, her voice careful but honest. "We didn't plan this," she said softly. "We almost didn't come out tonight at all." Everett looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. "Then I'm glad you did," he replied, and meant it. Something fragile hung between them, unspoken but powerful. This wasn't rescue, and it wasn't charity. It was three people walking a thin line between hope and fear. Everett realized that whatever happened next mattered deeply, because this wasn't just about dinner anymore. He looked at the girls again, then at Lauren. For the first time in years, he felt exposed, not as a CEO, not as a man with resources, but as someone who had been alone for too long, and who wasn't sure how to ask for help without breaking. The food arrived, filling the table with warmth and familiar smells. Lauren relaxed slightly as the girls focused on their plates. Ava arranged her napkin carefully, while Lily asked the waiter about dessert. Everett watched the small routine unfold, noticing how practiced Lauren was. This wasn't a special occasion for them. It was something rare. They ate quietly at first, the kind of quiet that comes from caution, not discomfort. Everett asked the girls what they liked about Christmas. Ava said she liked the lights because they made everything look kinder. Lily said she liked when people smiled more than usual. Lauren smiled at that, then quickly looked down. Everett asked where they were coming from, keeping his tone light. Lauren hesitated, then answered honestly. They lived a few subway stops away, in a small apartment. Christmas Eve dinners out were not a tradition. Tonight was something she had promised herself she would try. She explained that she worked 2 jobs, mostly evenings. The girls stayed with a neighbor most nights. Tonight, she wanted to be present, fully present, even if just for a few hours. The restaurant had felt intimidating when they walked in. She almost turned around at the door. Everett listened without interrupting, something he had learned the hard way. He noticed the way Lauren avoided certain details. He noticed how carefully she chose her words. This wasn't a story she told often. It was a story shaped by exhaustion and responsibility. One of the girls looked up suddenly, wiping her mouth. "Mom," Ava said, matter of fact. "Tell him why Christmas Eve matters to us." Lauren stiffened, caught off guard by the directness. She took a breath, then nodded slowly. Their father had passed away years ago. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just gone after a long illness. Christmas Eve had been his favorite night of the year. It was the one tradition Lauren refused to let disappear. Everett felt the words land heavier than he expected. Loss, recognized loss, without explanation. He didn't share his own story yet, but something inside him shifted position. This dinner was no longer accidental. Everett didn't rush to respond after Lauren spoke about her husband, because rushing had never helped anyone in moments like that. He let the silence exist, not as something awkward, but as space, the kind people rarely give when they don't know what to say. The girls continued eating, completely at ease, as if this table had always been theirs. That ease stayed with him, settling somewhere deep, where loneliness usually lived. He realized he wasn't thinking about business or time or schedules for once. Lauren noticed his restraint and felt her shoulders lower just a little, because she was used to people reacting too quickly. Some tried to fix things with sympathy, others with advice, neither of which she wanted tonight. Everett did neither, and that surprised her. He simply asked how long ago it had been, his voice calm and unassuming. She answered without drama, because drama had already taken enough from her life. The girls jumped into the conversation again, explaining how their father used to sing off-key in the kitchen every Christmas Eve. They laughed as they talked, correcting each other's details, filling the space with memory instead of sadness. Everett listened closely, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to understand who this man had been to them. He found himself imagining the scene, a small kitchen, simple food, voices overlapping. It felt real in a way his own memories hadn't felt in years. At some point, Lauren asked Everett what he did, clearly expecting a short answer and a polite change of subject. When he told her he ran a company, she nodded without curiosity or admiration, which caught him off guard. She didn't ask how big it was or what it was worth. Instead, she asked if he liked it. The question landed harder than any interview he had ever done. Everett hesitated, because the honest answer wasn't something he said out loud very often. He explained that he liked the structure, the sense of control, the clarity of knowing what needed to be done each day. What he didn't say was that he used work to keep his mind busy enough not to wander back to the past. Lauren seemed to understand anyway, reading between his words without pressing him. That quiet understanding made him feel strangely seen. The girls finished their meals and began drawing on the paper placemats, completely absorbed in their own world. They drew 4 stick figures sitting at a table, one noticeably taller than the others. Ava pushed the drawing toward Everett and asked if it looked right. He nodded, swallowing hard, because something about the image felt heavier than it should have. It wasn't what was drawn, but what was being offered without expectation. Everett excused himself briefly and walked toward the window near the entrance, needing a moment to breathe without being obvious. He looked out at the snow-covered street, people passing by with bags and laughter and places to go. For years, he had told himself that independence meant strength and that solitude meant peace. Standing there, he realized how carefully he had avoided situations exactly like this one, not because they hurt, but because they mattered. When he returned to the table, he made a decision that didn't feel logical, but felt necessary. He asked if Lauren and the girls would stay a little longer, maybe share dessert together. No pressure and no obligation. Lauren hesitated again, calculating bedtime, subway schedules, energy levels. The girls answered for her, their faces lighting up at the idea, and in that moment, Everett chose not to retreat, even though part of him wanted to. Dessert arrived slowly, 3 plates placed in front of the girls and 1 in front of Everett, the kind meant to be shared even when no one says it out loud. Lauren thanked the waiter quietly, already reaching for her wallet out of habit, then stopping when Everett shook his head gently. There was no insistence, no grand gesture, just a calm certainty that made refusal feel unnecessary. She nodded once, accepting without feeling small, and that mattered more than either of them realized. The girls immediately leaned in, negotiating bites and laughing when crumbs fell onto the table. As they ate, Everett asked the girls what they wanted to be when they grew up, expecting the usual answers. Ava said she wanted to build houses so people wouldn't have to move all the time. Lily said she wanted to help sick people feel less scared when they went to the doctor. Everett glanced at Lauren, surprised, and saw a flicker of emotion cross her face before she steadied herself. These weren't dreams taught lightly. They came from lived experience. Lauren explained that stability had become their shared language over the years. After their father passed, the girls had learned to pay attention to details most children didn't notice. They watched for signs of stress, changes in tone, moments when adults needed help but wouldn't ask. Everett felt a familiar ache settle in his chest, because he recognized that kind of awareness too well. It was the awareness you develop when life teaches you early that nothing is guaranteed. The conversation slowed, turning softer, less guarded, as if time itself had decided to be patient with them. Everett found himself sharing something he hadn't planned to say out loud. He spoke about the future he once imagined, the one that never arrived, the one he stopped talking about entirely. He didn't name the woman or the loss in detail, but the meaning was clear enough. Lauren listened without interrupting, without trying to comfort him, and that was exactly what he needed. One of the girls looked up from her plate and asked him a simple question that no adult would have asked so directly. "Do you still want that future?" Ava said, her voice steady and curious, not intrusive. Everett paused, surprised by how honest the question felt. He considered the answer carefully, because he didn't want to lie to a child who deserved the truth. "Yes," he said finally, "I think I do." The word hung in the air longer than expected, because it changed something between them. Lauren met his eyes, not with expectation, but with recognition. She knew what it meant to want something after convincing yourself you didn't anymore. The girls went back to their dessert, satisfied, as if the answer itself had completed something. Everett felt a warmth he hadn't associated with hope in a very long time. Outside, snow continued to fall, softening the city without asking permission. Inside, Everett realized he wasn't bracing for the end of the night anymore. He wasn't counting minutes or thinking about how to leave politely. He was present, fully, and intentionally, and that scared him more than solitude ever had. because presence meant the possibility of change. As the check came and Everett signed it without looking at the total, he made a quiet promise to himself. Not a promise about money or solutions or saving anyone. A promise to stay open, even when it felt risky, even when it would have been easier to withdraw. He didn't know what this connection meant yet, and he didn't need to. All he knew was that something important had begun, and he wasn't ready to let it go. When they said goodbye outside the restaurant that night, Everett expected the familiar drop in his chest, the one that usually came when something good ended. Instead, what he felt was unfinished, not painful, not urgent, just open, like a sentence that hadn't reached its period yet. Lauren thanked him again, this time meeting his eyes without hesitation, and that alone told him the night had mattered. The girls hugged him quickly, confidently, the way children do when something feels safe. As they disappeared into the subway, Everett stood there longer than he needed to, letting the cold sink in. For years, he had trained himself to walk away cleanly, to close moments before they could complicate his life. Tonight, he didn't move right away. He replayed the sound of the girls laughing, the way Lauren had listened without trying to fix him. It unsettled him in a way that felt strangely necessary. The days that followed were busy in all the usual ways. Meetings, travel, numbers that demanded attention, and decisions that carried weight. Yet something had changed in how Everett moved through them. He noticed himself pausing more often, questioning why certain things still felt urgent. He found himself wondering what Lauren was doing at that exact moment, whether the girls were already asleep, whether Christmas Eve had lingered for them too. Lauren tried to return to routine with discipline, because discipline was how she kept her life from falling apart. Morning rushes, school lunches, work shifts, bedtime stories, everything accounted for. But the girls kept bringing Everett up, casually, without expectation. They talked about the restaurant, the dessert, how he listened to them like they were important. Lauren realized they weren't attaching to him as a person with resources, but as a presence that felt steady. One night, after the girls were asleep, Lauren sat alone at the small kitchen table and allowed herself to think. She hadn't done that in a long time without immediately shutting the thoughts down. Letting people in had always come with loss attached, but Everett hadn't pushed, hadn't promised, hadn't tried to insert himself into their lives. That restraint made the connection feel safer, not weaker. Everett wrote the note slowly, deleting and rewriting it more times than he cared to admit. He wanted it to sound honest without being heavy, open without being intrusive. When he finally sent it, he felt exposed in a way success had never made him feel. There was no guarantee of response, no control over how it would be received, and that vulnerability stayed with him long after he pressed send. Lauren read the message late at night, sitting on the edge of her bed so the girls wouldn't hear her phone vibrate. She reread it twice, then once more, checking for subtext that wasn't there. What she found instead was gratitude, clarity, and respect for her boundaries. She responded simply, not because she wanted to keep distance, but because she wanted to build something slowly. That choice felt intentional, not defensive. Their communication settled into an easy rhythm that neither of them named. Short messages, occasional photos, shared observations about ordinary days. No pressure to perform, no demand for reassurance. Everett learned how much intimacy could exist without intensity. Lauren learned that consistency didn't have to mean obligation. Still, doubts surfaced, especially in quiet moments. Everett wondered whether he was stepping into a life he didn't know how to maintain. Lauren wondered what it meant to let her daughters grow attached to someone again. Both of them felt the weight of responsibility differently, but equally. Neither spoke those fears out loud yet, afraid of breaking something fragile. The girls, however, sensed growth where adults sensed risk. They began including Everett in stories about the future without asking permission. Small things, like mentioning him when talking about next Christmas or summer plans. Lauren noticed, corrected gently when needed, but didn't shut it down completely. She trusted her daughter's instincts more than she trusted her own. Late one evening, Everett sat alone in his apartment, the city quiet beneath him. The silence that once felt comforting now felt incomplete. He realized that solitude wasn't peace when it was chosen out of fear. He didn't want to retreat again, even though retreat had always been easier. For the first time, he chose to stay present, knowing it might change everything. The envelope didn't arrive on a dramatic day. It came on an ordinary afternoon, mixed in with bank statements and routine mail, the kind Everett usually sorted without thinking. He almost tossed it aside, assuming it was another